predavatelja.
Dragi prijatelji, res v veselje mi je, da je z nami danes profesor Dario Križ. Je doktor biokemičnih znanosti, inovator, podjetnik. Teh naštevanj bi bilo marsikaj, posebej pa moram izpostaviti, da je častni konzul Republike Slovenije na Švedskem in da je član Rotary kluba Lund. In njegovo podjetje European Science Institute of Science je uvrščeno na švedsko borzo, deluje na področju laboratorijskih raziskav, je zelo vpet v raziskave in v posel. Hkrati moram tudi povedati, da je Dario moj rotarijski boter in mi je še posebej veselje, da je dan z nami. Sigurno bi prišel tudi na veliki rotarijski ples, če bi bil pred 2 tedni, ampak zdaj smo obsojeni na srečanja preko Zooma in mu izrekam res toplo dobrodošlico in mu predajam besedo, da nas nagovori.
Hvala, Edi, hvala. Sam da bom jaz poskusil, nisem še, to je drugič, ko delam predavanje preko Zooma, tako da...
Še nekaj bom dodal, zelo pomembnega. Dario bo predaval v angleščini, ampak zdaj ste slišali, govori odlično slovensko, ampak Dario ni hodil v nobeno slovensko šolo, se pravi, je rojen na Švedskem, obiskoval osnovno, srednjo, doštudiral do doktorata na Švedskem in učil se slovenščine vedno samo v domačem okolju. In kot tak je eden zavednih Slovencev, ki vsake počitnice preživlja v Sloveniji, če le lahko doma govori z otroci slovensko. Njegova soproga Kirstin je Američanka, govori z otroci ameriško, po angleško, no. In ko so zunaj, v Lundu govorijo švedsko, tako da vse jezike uporabljajo vsakodnevno, ampak za predavanje mu je lažje, ker govori o znanosti, da bo v angleščini predaval, tako da mu prosim oprostite to, da se je odločil predavati v angleščini. Tako da Dario, izvoli zdaj.
Hvala. Okay, well, first I'd like to thank everybody for this invitation. It's been, I think, almost exactly a year ago, I was visiting the Rotary Club Ljubljana. It was before the pandemic, and Edi and I, we met at that time. We did even post in TUI together. So it's changed a lot the world since, of course. I prefer to give presentations in live than Zoom because it feels very impersonal, of course. The title of my presentation is Science and Business, a Swedish-Slovenian comparison. This is a presentation I had in October 2019 on the, and I'll say this in Slovene, the 10. konferenca slovenskih znanstvenikov in gospodarstvenikov iz sveta in Slovenije. And it was a very nice conference. It included people from all over the world, from Canada, from US, Australia, really a very broad spectrum of people that participated with Slovene roots, of course. Sweden has historically been very successful with commercialization of science. And most people know at least one global Swedish company that has roots in Sweden. I can mention, for instance, Ericsson, Skype, Spotify, Volvo, Saab, Tetra Pak, Atlas Copco, Scania, Electrolux. There's a whole range of them. So the question is, why is a population of 10 million people so successful in commercialization of science? And what can Slovenia learn for it? So during the presentation, I will try to answer this question, and I'll base it on comparison between Sweden and Slovenia, and I'll also use some of my own experiences from business and science. So I would first like to say a couple words about myself. Edi already presented me. I am Slovene, but I was born in Sweden. I'm living in the old university town of Lund, which has a university from 1666. I have an academic path at the university, as Adi mentioned. I did my master's degree in chemical engineering in 1988. I did a PhD in biochemistry in 1994, and then in 2004, I became an associate professor in biochemistry at Lund University. But because I'm very interested in Slovene history and old languages, I have for the last 2 years also studied Latin at my free time at the Lund University. And I probably have gathered now a whole year of Latin studies at the university level. Since 2014, as Adi mentioned, I'm also the honorary consul for Republike Slovenije to the Kingdom of Sweden, and that has given me a lot of opportunities to meet a lot of the Slovene communities all over in Sweden, and also companies and different culture events that we attend. I have an experience of more than 20 years to build high-tech companies, which has given me a lot of experience with international deals, entrepreneurship, and innovation. I am the inventor of 20 registered patents, and I founded a couple of high-tech startup companies that are on the Swedish stock market. To mention 4 of them, it's Life Assays, Genovis, Uris, Implementasol. And I would like especially to thank my mentor for my PhD thesis, Professor Klaus Mosbach, who was a professor at Lund University, but he was also a full professor at ETH in Zurich, in Switzerland, because he actually taught me how to connect science with patents and with actually trying to make business out of it too. He also gave me the opportunity to have the first international experience by becoming a scientific advisor to a NASDAQ listed company. It's called IGEN Incorporated. So in the picture here, you can see the university house in Lund. It is, you see the trees are blooming, so this is in May. So if you ever plan to come to Lund, I would really suggest that you should take it in the spring and not in the fall or the other part of the year, because it can become very windy and cloudy and you don't see the sun as often as in Slovenia. So I thought, because I gave this presentation a little bit over a year ago first time, I thought I would check now first, is Sweden still in the top, among the top nations? And yes, actually 2021, there was just recently published a study by Bloomberg. And as you see here, Sweden is on the 5th place as the most innovative economies in the world. Above is Germany on almost the same score. And then you have Switzerland, Singapore, and South Korea. Below, you have other Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Finland, Israel is also very high, and Austria is among those, I think, the 10 one here. So yes, it's very relevant. I mean, there's something Sweden does that is good and maybe something we should look at from Slovene perspective and try to copy if possible. So what is the Swedish model? Well, I believe that most modern countries have a similar model, but what differs in this model in different countries? Well, first I'd like to mention that there are, in principle, 3 kinds of financing possibility for science. If it's at the universities or at companies. In Sweden, I mean, what I call the politically decided financing that comes either from research grants, which amounts to about 4 billion euros. And there can come also from the EU, which is about 2 billion euros. But the biggest part is from the companies, about 10 billion euros. So in total is 16 billion euros each year that's invested in science and development in Sweden. If you go to the next step, then it's when you take this science and move it to what I call the black box before it can reach business. This is where it's very difficult to find what happens there. And there are big PhD works that have been done on this, and people are trying to, but I think in reality, there is no equation how to change science to business, because if there would be, then I think that would be very automatized, this process, right? But everybody who invests in this type of companies know that it's very unsure if actually you will have, so to say, an output that generates some business from it. So for instance, in Sweden, you have capital sources and you have a lot of them. So that is not the reason, the only reason why the success is so high for Sweden. But you have something called old capital, you have venture capital, you have grants also from the government, you have also stock financing and foreign capital. And this, of course, is used for turning the science into innovation, patents, and commercialization. But the other input that I think is very important, that's the entrepreneur here is a very important part of this black box. I mean, if you can have the best project and a bad entrepreneur, it will fail. You can even have a worse project and a good entrepreneur, you could get some result out of it. So I think that is a very important parameter that is important to try to look closer to. Then you have market and business input. And if you already have a certain infrastructure of businesses, then you have more of that input into this black box nationally in form of people who know, who have been working for a bigger company or a relevant company. So I think this also is to say that the soil that the company seeds, the science seeds are growing in, and then become into plants, and that turns into business. So I looked up and saw how much is Slovenia investing in our science and development, and I found from 2017 a number of 0.8 billion euros, which is compared to 16 billion euros. Of course, you have to look at that on a per capita, per population. And then I concluded that the Slovenia's expenses on research and development today is 4 times lower than Sweden. So obviously that should lower the output with maybe 4 times or so. So the question is here, why? What could we learn from this? I mean, I think that Slovenia should learn from other countries and copy successful concepts such as regulation and taxes. If we look back in history, we all remember where China was 50 years ago and where they are today. I mean, 50 years ago, Slovenia was way ahead of China technologically. Now China is competing with the top companies, with American, and they're even being exposed to blockages, so they can't compete anymore, right? So I think we need to set our ambitions high and try to work like the Chinese did. They start off by copying, and then slowly they'll move up the innovation chain, and then they'll start doing products which are, of course, on the top. So, but to go back to Sweden, why is Sweden successful? And I would think that one successful concept in Sweden is something that Sweden calls the academic freedom. I don't think this concept is known outside Sweden, so I'll try to define what that means. So universities are developing the societies both culturally and economically. And the most important factor to improve the work done by universities is to allow them to, what you say in Sweden, to work with an academic freedom. And that means that you have the freedom to choose your research topic and methods at the university. You have freedom to publish results, and you have freedom to get involved with critical comments about events in the society. Those are 3 first points. But then comes the 4th point, and this is something that is more unique in Sweden, and that's that in Sweden, academic freedom also means that the researcher owns his research and his patents. This was regulated already by the Swedish law in 1949. So it means that the university can never own the patent. So even though the researcher used publicly funded equipment and the project, when the patent is done, he owns it. The idea is here that, of course, he will create something that's of benefit for the society, and that he is more suitable to commercialize the result than the university is, because they have no experience from that, of course. So I was looking into patents, and I said, let's look at the patents in the United States. I mean, it's far away from both Sweden and Slovenia. And let's take the date 1993, July 13th, because that's when Slovenia could apply as individual country patents in the US. And that's where in their database, I can find them there, and until 2019. And then I found that there are 54,300 US patents that have Swedish inventors. And there are 944 US patents that have Slovene inventors at the same time. Now that's a pretty large difference. It's not only 4, right? Myself, I have 12 patents during the same period in the US. So if you take this per capita, you can see that Slovenia has 11 times less US patents than Sweden. So this doesn't motivate the factor 4 in financing that we saw in the last slide in funding. Here's thus something else that also inhibits the conversion from Slovenian science and development into commercialization. And that's interesting, I think, to look into closer. So how are startups financed? So when you go from science to become a business, you become a startup. And then is the question, how do you do it in Sweden? Well, in Sweden, as I mentioned before, you have grants that comes from governmental agencies or the EU. You have old money, people who have started industries and then sold them and they reinvest them in new startup companies. You have venture capital companies. And this type of investments opens often up doors to markets and synergies. For instance, if a venture capital company invests in your company, they might already have another company where they can do some synergies, and you can use maybe each other's, use each other's services to increase the output. People who have had companies before have very good connections in the industry, so they can also help you to connect to the right people to expand fast. Then they have in Sweden something that Sweden is a little bit more alone with, even in Europe, I would say, a stock market for smaller companies. There are at least 3 lists that are more regulated. Spotlight Stock Market in Stockholm, Nordic Growth Market, and First North. First North is owned by NASDAQ. Let's see, I think Nordic Growth Market is owned by the Frankfurt Board Stock Market, and Spotlight Stock Market is still Swedish owned. And there is like 164 companies at the first stock market, 79 and 280 companies. So there are quite a lot of companies that get their financing or receive their financing when they were on that stock market. Then there's also foreign capital, of course, that comes in. Now, if I look here, what can I find in Slovenia? I would see I could find the R&D grants from governmental and EU grants. I could find foreign capital, but there is no stock market that can finance the growth. And I also couldn't find really any significant venture capital or old money investment culture. So Slovenia has 2 out of 4, I would say, 50% here. So when I give you this, I would like to tell you a little bit about my own journey as an entrepreneur. It started last millennium, so a long time ago, in 1996, when Lund University met University of California, San Diego. That was when Kirsten, my wife-to-be, came as an exchange student for a 6-month project to my lab. And from that day and on, we've been working with blood analysis together. And one could say the biochemistry really worked out on all planes. Today, we have 2 children. We live in Lund. Our summers before the pandemic, I must say, we always spent in our apartment in beautiful Piran or in sunny California. So what did we do? Well, we introduced our research when we were at university still. We worked with magnetically labeled antibodies and using them for blood analysis. This led both to my associate professorship and to my wife's PhD degree. And I can say this, that when we were at university, a lot was focused around the science. And the thinking is, of course, very different when you work on a project as a scientist compared to how you think when you go over into the commercial phase. And I think that this journey, the transformation from science to commercialization, well, the first step was that we put after we received and started up the company, in year 2000, we put the company on the stock market in Stockholm. And I was the president of the company. The name was Life Assays between year 2000 and 2011. This gave many experiences when we did this company. It was everything from financial reporting, financial regulation, environmental production regulations, clinical tests, ISO, IVDC certification. So it was a very long step to go here from the science, of course. And our first decision was to enter veterinary sector with our products because the competition of the human sector was higher. There were other competing instruments with other technologies. And so because the pricing was higher, we said it's better with a small company to go first into a smaller market where we will be strong and not to go into the larger market, but where we exposed to more competition. So our products were successful, and in 2009 we became the first on the veterinary market of point of care or near patient monitoring of inflammation proteins, which was the C-reactive protein we introduced at the time. The test became rapidly the standard on the Scandinavian market in Scandinavian animal hospitals, and has today still about 50% of the market. In 2011, we decided to sell out our share in the company, and then a venture capital company took over, and they have been continuing developing the company and are expanding now towards human tests too, and so on. But for us, the trip was until 2011 in that company. That's often how, as a scientist, you have to get used to. I mean, you develop something, you follow it, and then you kind of at some time you have to decide, do you really want to do that, or are you burning more for the science and you want to create new projects? And that's what we have chosen to do. So we're still working with blood analysis, but with another company now, as Edi mentioned. And so these are my experiences. But then I was also thinking, how does the business environment, I mean, let's say always when I think about Slovenia, I think there's a lot of markets around. Slovenia is fantastically positioned. Sweden is very off. I mean, Slovenia should have an advantage. So I said, let's take a startup company and say we put it in Ljubljana, and we take on the map and make a circle with a radius 500 kilometers around Ljubljana. How many people do we encircle? 91 million people. Let's say we do the same in Los Angeles. We have 31 million people. Let's say we do it around Stockholm, we get 17 million people. Now, why is this important? Well, this means that the company with one salesperson could actually cover this area by visiting customers on has potentially 91 million people that go. So you don't need so many salespeople. I mean, you have a position if you place the company with Ljubljana, that's strategically extremely well placed. So there is no reason to say that the location is wrong. So then we come to the question, so what are the main problems? I mean, legislations. I can tell from a Swedish perspective that since Sweden entered EU, the bureaucracy in Sweden has increased. It was easier with doing business in Sweden before there was EU. Every year there are new regulations being introduced, and I think that's actually not good. For instance, now the environmental regulations have become very problematic. You can't, in principle, do anything without high fees for regulatory environmental inspections. You just go over to Denmark, which is half an hour from here, and it's completely different climate. They say, they look at, is it reasonable if you have a small production that is like negligible, that you should be exposed? I mean, they said, no, for every EU regulation, we're going to take away 2 old ones, because we have to have a strategy to reduce the regulatory and financial burden of the startup companies. And I think Denmark is on the right path. Unfortunately, I think Sweden will have, that's a problem that will lower Swedish innovation index rating. Then we have, of course, regulations. And this, I don't have this experience, but when there are regulatory visits in Sweden, they're always, how should I say it, they're your friends when they come. They would never fine you or something like that. They will first tell you have to correct something, and then they'll come back and control again. You might get a reminder. Then it will go up to a court who will fine you if you haven't followed the inspections, right? As I understood, in Slovenia, you can get a fine directly on the first visit, which is also, again, maybe not good, because then the actual inspector has maybe too much power, and that can be abused in different ways. Then we have also something that I think that, I mean, globalization has positive effects, but it also has negative effects. Up till very recently, Sweden had companies that had their headquarters in Sweden. I can mention here Lund. It was a company called Gambro that was making dialysis machines, a world-leading medical diagnostic devices company. We had another company that was called Draco with beta blockers for asthmatic patients. Interesting, I think Draco is a very interesting example. Draco was then purchased by a Swedish company from Stockholm called Astra, and they became Astra Draco. Then Astra merged with Zeneca, and they became a multinational company. Now, as long as Draco existed here in Lund, they were both a world company delivering incomes. They were taking care of PhD students. They were having projects at the Lund University. It's just like a micro environment where we both had research park, large industry, and university working as one unit to deliver new companies. And the growth of companies were pretty amazing in Lund at the research park here. Well, what happened when it comes over to the Zeneca phase, when it's all merged and the board is not in Sweden anymore, they will say like this, suddenly someone in the board, and this is typical. You know what? Those people in Lund, they were really good at innovation. What they should focus is only innovation, and we should take all the trademarks and all the sales and production customers away and have that produced somewhere else. And that sounds reasonable in the boardroom. But what you don't see in the boardroom is that when you pull apart in a company the market contact, the knowledge of what the customers want from the research, then you're back to the startup company again. So at the end, they decided to cancel the Draco company, moved even the RD away, which was to me like a proof how negatively a expansion also can go. And I think that is what's the most important for Slovenia. So we don't take roots. I mean, it's better to grow slower and to keep the control in the country, because when an outside investor comes, he's not interested in the let's say, what he contributes to the country. He's only interested in what he can pull out of the company as fast as possible. So that's my opinion on that issue. So I think in Slovene case, it's also, I can see a lot of students coming up here when we have our embassy events in Copenhagen and here at the consulate in Lund. Skilled workforce, people go out, they're young, they meet people, don't come back. I think entrepreneurs and startup companies, there are not so many as I would hope. I've tried to reach out and see how many I can find in Slovenia. And maybe what I most can see also is that there is sometimes too much lower self-esteem. I mean, if we look at Americans, they have like enormous self-esteem, like over. But I think in Slovenia, we're more this other one that we feel more, oh, this is not okay. I mean, more, and I think that also has to be more encouraged to think more positively. So I can say a little bit, Slovenia does have some sunshine stories that we all should be proud of as Slovenes. In 2014, I had the opportunity to meet Peter Floriančič in Bled with a wonderful afternoon we had together. I first read his book that he wrote, and I was very impressed by his life story. And I then decided I really wanted to visit, and we had a coffee in his office, and we really related as innovator to innovator. So it was a fantastic memory. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, so I really want to say he was someone who was an innovator, entrepreneur, and much more, I would say. So that was a fantastic time to be able to meet him there. Then also in 2014, I met my friend Aleš Strančar, who started Via Separation in Ajdovščina in 1998. And at that time, he had a little bit struggling with financing, but I was really happy this year in November when I read that he sold Via Separation for 360 million euro, which is a fantastic deal. But it proves that you can go like from absolutely nothing and build up something to an industry that a global company really is interested in. Of course, in a way, I would be more happy if it would stay in Aleš's hands and continue grow. But those are the play rules. And I think, I mean, people like Aleš are the people that then come in and can look into new companies in Slovenia, maybe help them grow because they have the experience of the trip from before. So my advice when I look to this to young people that are entrepreneurs and scientists who want to start, I would just say, like, you know, Slovenia has a wonderful location for doing business, and use it. And that would be what I would like to present to you today. Thank you very much for your attention. The questions we can take in Slovene if you want to.
Hvala lepa. Mislim, da smo dobili par izjemno dobrih iztočnic Ne vem, če se vsi zavedate, jaz kot nekdo, ki je bil nekaj časa zelo blizu vlade, zelo cenim to, kar je bilo rečeno strani doktorja Križa. Bi pa, preden postavim vprašanje, vam predstavil samo eno dejstvo, ki je v Sloveniji zelo, zelo malo znano. Namreč na začetku leta 2009, ko se je v bistvu začela ta globalna finančna kriza, je takratni minister za finance, doktor France Križanič, prišel s pobudo in jo dejansko tudi izpeljal in je na začetku najhujše finančne krize po drugi svetovni vojni praktično podvojil državne izdatke za raziskave oziroma za znanost in tehnologijo. V samo 2 letih je slovenska znanost, če jo merimo po številu objav na 1000 raziskovalcev oziroma po prijavljenih patentih, dosegla avstrijsko raven, ki ste videli je na 10. mestu v svetu. Samo v 2 letih, kar je zame svojevrsten čudež, pričakoval bi vsaj 5 let, po neko minimalno dobo. Jasno, potem je prišla druga vlada sedanjega predsednika, ki je takoj kot ukrepe, varčevalne ukrepe uvedla zmanjšanje izdatkov za znanost in tehnologijo. In kaj se je zgodilo? Večina tistih slovenskih znanstvenikov, ki je poletela v prejšnjih 2 letih, je odšla v tujino. In to je bila neka strahotna škoda. Zdaj, mislim, v primerjavi z Švedsko je to preplet ukrepov. Ena je državna politika, ki mora seveda vedeti, kaj hoče. Je poslovno okolje, ki jasno ima neko zgodovino, ima težo, ima finančno globino, ki jo mi še nimamo, in jasno potem je kvaliteta izobraževalnega sistema. Mi vsega tega nimamo, imamo pa kolikor toliko solidno šolstvo in veliko ljudi in to slovensko kulturo, ki je tausendkünstlerska. Slovenski človek je bil navajen za veliko stvari poskrbeti sam, se znajti. In jaz opažam kot lastnik neke firme, ki ne trpi od low self-esteem in je mogoče najboljša v svojem sektorju v Evropi, da ko Slovenci enkrat grejo čez to prepreko, da vidijo sebe kot enakovredne vsem drugim, in da se sprosti tista zavora v glavi, potem so lahko zelo dobri, če ne celo najboljši. Kaj vi mislite predvsem glede te točke?
Vprašanje meni, ja?
Ja.
Ok, Kriz, ja. Ne, jaz se strinjam, da to je samo v glavi ta zavora. In mislim, kada tudi zunaj se vidi, kad prije ljudje Slovenci, šolstvo slovensko zelo dobro. Tudi, bi rekel, švedsko šolstvo pada v vseh PISA raportih in jaz mislim, Švedska bo večje probleme imela leta, kad pridejo, kar je bilo. In Švedi se to zavedajo in se tudi to bojijo, vejo, da morajo nekako, nočejo izgubiti to prednost, ki imajo. Tudi, ko se vidi, ko pridejo slovenski študenti v tujino, so zelo dobri, pridni, samozavestni tudi. Vem pa tudi, da če se, recimo, ker imamo prijatelje dol na Bavarskem, jaz vidim, da če jaz rečem, ker govorim angleško, mi govorimo angleško doma, tako da moja angleščina je boljša kot od teh Nemcev, ampak ker oni vprašajo me, kaj si pa ti? Ja, jaz sem Slovenc. Ja, a res? Pa si rojen na Švedskem, nisi Šved? Ne, jaz sem Slovenc, to ni diskusija o tem, jaz se slovensko z mojim otrokom pogovarjam in vidim, da oni raj bi slišali, da sem Šved, da sem Slovenc, pa da imajo, bi rekel, en handicap v tem jeziku ali diskusiji, ker pač oni gledajo zelo gor na Američane. Isto tudi na Švedskem, recimo, če gledaš, mi, ki smo tukaj zrasli, tako je pa še Jugoslavija, so tudi Švedi imeli svojo lestvico, mislim, to so bili, če si bil Jugoslovan, če si bil Čeh, je bilo bolj lepo gledano v švedskem učenju, če si bil Nemčevi, najvisoko je bilo pa Američana. Če si bil Jugoslovan, so imeli Turke pod nami, to so imeli kar svoje tisto. In to v dosti državam še zmeraj eksistira, in to se ne sme pozabiti. In jaz mislim, zaradi tega tudi, kadar mi to tudi nam daje eno slabo samozavest, ker si sam lahko sami, bi rekel, spremenimo, da ne dovolimo drugim, da definiramo, kdo smo, ampak da to sami naredimo z našim delom in z našim rezultatom. Mislim, tako jaz mislim.
Hvala lepa. Še kakšno vprašanje? Ja, Ciril?
Lep pozdrav. Hur står det till, min vän?
Det står väldigt bra till, du talar svenska då.
Jaz sem imel eno genialno učiteljico fizike v srednji šoli, ki se je učila švedsko in sem se naučil par besed. Recimo, znam reči osamega bra flikorna, ne?
Ja.
Super. Ampak danes smo tako, en bra pojke, ne?
Ja, to je dober fant.
Tako, transferje. Moj komentar je glede tega, to je zelo domiselno, ste to prikazali, te kroge okrog Slovenije, kjer milijoni naraščajo bolj skokovito, kakor v primeru ameriških mest, vendar je pa seveda pomembna ovira to, da ko se ti v ameriških mestih premakneš po teh cestah, govorijo to ljudje angleško, pa če bi natančno pogledali, Silicon Valley je odvisen tako rekoč ne od cesta, pa od ulic. Vsi ti znanstveniki so kavo skupaj pil, ali pa stopili ven iz, recimo, te pregovorne garaže, pa bliže pri sosedu, ki je razvil pa printerje, tisti pa delal software za njih. Skratka, to je vendar, je mečke bolj kompleksno, čeprav pa to drži, da smo v izredno dobri lokaciji. Tako da ta komentar, potem pa še to sem hotel, pa mogoče želite mečke bolj pojasniti, kakšen je vaš odnos do regulacij ali pa konkretno o katerih regulacijah Evropske unije govorite. Zakaj sem tukaj zastrigel z ušesi, namreč zaradi tega, ker zdaj pa res zaradi Brexita pa poslušamo že 2-3 leta, da te regulacije evropske so pa vendarle v redu, da se jih ne gre kar takole odreči. Pa to, da ste opozorili, da Danska pa očitno kljub evropskim regulacijam pa lahko nekako ima nek deal, Evropa 2 regulacije, oni se pa 3 znebijo. Tako da prosim komentirajte glede regulacij. Drugače odlično, hvala, kratko jedrnato.
Ja, hvala. Ja, ne, mislim, to zaradi teh krogov, mislim, to je zaradi trga. Zdaj, v Silicon Valley to imaš, bi rekel, tehnološko corporation, ki se dela s tistim, ki so bližje, ampak če se ima podjetje, se hoče imeti stranke, ki se lahko prodaja izdelke. Regulacija, jaz sem to opazil, prvič, ko sem to opazil, ko smo v Life Assaysu delali, hoteli narediti proizvodnjo, tako ko smo šli iz testa za krvno analizo, kot znanstveniki, pa smo hoteli ga prodati, ko smo ga naredili. In takrat je predprišlo, da je švedska regulacija bila spremenjena, tako da, če se ima eno kemično reakcijo, se gre v najvišjo stopnjo, da se mora imeti ta, ne vem, ko se te reče v slovenščini, ampak the environmental court, the higher environmental court. Edi, ti veš, to bi rekel, ja, no, ni var, ampak se mora to sodišče nekako za okolje, In tako sem rekel, ok, to je v redu. Potem smo pa začeli brati zakon malo bolj podrobno, pa sem videl, da ta podjetje Astra, ki je bil čez cesto, oni so pa imeli en research factory, 5000 zaposlenih, nas je bilo pa 10, so uporabljali 100-krat več iste kemikalije, kot mi smo, ampak ker niso prodajali, je bilo samo za znanstvene namene, ni bilo treba ta dovoljenje, nam pa ja, zato, ko smo imeli eno prodajo takrat 100,000 evrov, In to se mi zdi malo čudno, to pa je res nek čud. Potem sem pa še bral v zakonu, pa je pisal tudi, da če delaš z isto kemikalijo kozmetične produkte, ki se lahko tudi za to uporablja, se pa do 100 ton izjeme, kar mi smo porabili 5 kil, Tako da potem sem šel pa na kako se imenuje to, environmental, the county's environmental agency.
Tako, okoljska agencija, agencija za okolje.
Okoljska agencija, no hvala to. Oni so rekli, ja, to nismo mi, to je EU nam dal, mi ne moramo se to moramo slediti, to so navodila od EU. In tudi to sem povedal, v redu, razumem. Ko smo pa tisto firmo prodali, pa smo na novo odprli, pa so kontaktirali Dance, oni so rekli, ne, tukaj, če so take majhne količine, ni treba nobenih dovoljenj, mi samo vzamemo, kada je kvantiteta relevantna. In potem sem pa razumel, Švedska tolmači EU pravila tako strogo, da tudi svoji industriji škodi. To so politični dogovori v parlamentu in zato je do tega prišlo, ker ni noben lobijist za manjšo industrijo, bi rekel, lobiral, in tudi noben, bi rekel, po kmečki pameti malo misli, does this make sense ali ne. In to je bil ena. So tudi pravila na finančnem sektorju, ki se uvajajo noter, ki so, da bi zaščitili, ampak komplicirajo. Tisti pa, ki so kriminalci, pa še zmeraj lahko, bi rekel, goljufali. Je dosti, mislim, ki si bi lahko pregledali malo, ker mislim, smer mora biti, da bomo enostavno zakonodajo, da bomo, mislim, naredili bolj lahko za ljudi, da odprejo podjetja, da naredijo delovna mesta za druge ljudi in tako naprej. Zdaj, če kršiš, pa da okolje osnažuješ v redu, to se mora kaznovati, ali pa če za druga. Ne, da se da en sistem, ki sistematično inhibira podjetništvo, na primer. To je moja izkušnja.
Hvala lepa. Mislim, to je res. Brata Wright ne bi nikoli zletela, če bi ima nemudoma težil z varnostjo v letalskem prometu. Ja. Tako, ja. Hvala, odlično.
Ja, Marjan, izvoli. Mikrofon, Marjan, mikrofon.
Še nisi, daj, Marjan.
Marko, oprosti. Marko, veš, kaj ti pa lahko vmes pa izklapljaš, veš?
Ja,
mikrofon, zelo dober mikrofon imaš in lovi tvoje dihanje.
Aha, v redu, hvala.
Ki ga zelo cenim, se veš, kot preživelec korone, hvala Bogu, ne, dihati treba.
Levo dole, Marjan, poglej, mikrofon imaš še zmeraj predčrtan. Levo spodaj.
Se mora malo miško v času premakniti, da se pokaže dol.
Zdaj ti bom jaz upihnul, kaj? Čakaj malo. Marjan, evo Marjan, zdaj ti bom jaz.
Dobro, pred do Marjan vklopi svoj mikrofon. Je še kakšno drugo vprašanje? Mogoče ga preskočimo v tem trenutku.
No, jaz bi lahko samo nekaj povedal, pa niti ni vprašanje, ampak zahvala, da ste nam natočil čašu čistega vina. Mislim, za Slovenijo, ne? In tiste radius od 500 km sem zelo dobro razumel in še kaj drugega. Odlično je. Hvala vam lepa.
Hvala lepa.
Dobro, Guček.
Jaz sem mislil Darja vprašati, ker ima lepo število patentov, ker mi v Sloveniji pridejo zelo draga patentiranja, na primer in the States, v Združenih državah, tudi Švedska. Tako da, ko začneš, jaz sem imel s prijateljem patent, vendar smo za to porabili 40 000 evrov, predno bi karkoli bilo za eno leto. Kako pa vi gledate na to, oziroma kakšne izkušnje imate vi? Prosim.
Ja, ko sem bil še, bi rekel, samo znanstvenik, sem bil zelo to patente noter in tako je res, je zelo drago in če se nima, bi rekel, finance, ker noter prije tudi podjetje ali projekt, je zelo težko to sam držati. Eni patenti so zelo še bolj dragi, pa majhen narod, eni Amerika, mislim, da je vse kar v redu, ker se dobi kar velik trg za ta patent. Jaz bi tudi rekel, da včasih patent ni toliko važen. Je boljše, da se malo bolj, bi rekel, koncentrira na produkcijo in da se to bolj tajno drži in da se poskuša narediti to optimalno, da noben ne more tako delati, bi rekel, po taki ceni, da se to ne objavi, kot Coca-Cola, recimo. Podjetje, ki smo za krvno analizo prvo naredili, smo imeli patente povsod, tega, kar imamo zdaj, pa smo se odločili, da ne bomo patentov vzeli, ampak bomo sam delali s tehnologijo, da naredimo proces čim bolj pocen. Tako recimo zdaj smo vse dele, ki gre v test noter, lokalno imamo tukaj na Švedskem, antitelesa se producirajo 200 kilometrov tukaj in tako naprej. Tako da to so različne, nič ni narobe, samo se mora ena strategija vzeti. Zdaj, če se dela z zdravilom, takrat se rabi patente, ker lahko kakšen noter pride. Ampak, če vzamemo Krko, delajo zdravilem, kamor patent ne deluje več, Tako da oni že kakšen let prej začnejo to lepo pripravljati in to je zelo pametna strategija, mislim, ker patent te ščiti, ampak na isti čas moraš tudi narediti izjavo, kaj hočeš ščititi, tako da te tudi ranljivega naredi.
Ja, hvala.
Ja, naslednji.
Jaka Maroko.
Hvala lepa, gospod, za izvrstno predavanje. Meni je bila tudi predvsem všeč ta strnjenost pri predavanju, ker se predavanje običajno majčkeno preveč za moj okus lahko razvlečejo. To predavanje je bilo res zelo ekonomično. Imam pa vprašanje, ker sem glasbenik in delam že leta v izobraževanju na Univerzi v Ljubljani, na Akademiji za glasbo. Prej ste omenil za Švedsko med vrsticami njihov šolski sistem oziroma education system Sweden. Mi v Sloveniji zelo veliko poslušamo, konkretno sicer bolj o Finski, raziskave, da imajo na Finskem blazno dobre šole in dober predvsem sistem. Pa me zanima, kaj ste mislili pravzaprav s tem, da se na Švedskem nekako opažate, pravzaprav, da se nekako ta šolski sistem, kako bi rekel, podira oziroma da se slabša, če sem prav razumel, pravzaprav, da se slabša nivo oziroma kakovost šolanja. To bi me malo zanimalo, če mi lahko mogoče majčkeno več o tem poveste. Hvala lepa, čestitke še enkrat.
Hvala. Mislim to, ker imamo dva otroka, ki sta zdaj šla skozi cel sistem, jaz lahko rečem, sem zelo vesel, da nisem šel skozi švedski šolski sistem zdaj, ker mi ne bi tako uspel, kot mi je. Je se spremenil, stari sistem, mi smo še zmeraj imeli učitelje, ki so bili začeli učiti 1940 leta, čeprav so že, ker sem jaz hodil v šolo, spremenili sistem malo, ampak oni so se še zmeraj držali teh starih sistemov. In kar jaz vidim, jaz sem bil zdaj tudi predsednik The Parent Association, ko sem bil to po slovenski rekel.
Starševske skupnosti.
Ja,
Svet staršev.
No, tako, tudi, in sem bil zelo angažiran v šoli tukaj v Lundu enkrat iz začetka. Sem rekel, moramo introducirati kvaliteto, kako vemo, zato kar smo opazili v švedskem sistemu, je, da učitelj ne more povedati učencu, kaj so cilji, da se bo naučil. Je tako, bi rekel, ni konkretno, kaj. Tako da jaz kot starš sem sedel tam in poslušam in imam vseh nekaj šole vzad sabo in ne razumem točno, kaj on hoče od mojega otroka, da bo on. Potem sem pa rekel, v redu, kje je knjiga? In sem videl, tukaj vsako poglavje piše, kaj moraš narediti, To je, kar ti moraš narediti, tukaj imaš lepo čas in tako lahko greš potem. In tako se ne dela v švedski šoli, da vse je zelo, bi rekel, in zato Švedska pada v šolskem raziskavam. In zdaj zadnji test, ki je bil odpisan, ni to padla, ampak zato, ker so, 10-20% učencev ven izvzeli študije, zato, ker so rekli, da so iz področja, kam niso imeli šanse za švedsko začijo, ker so iz tujine not prišli in tako naprej. Ampak jaz sem tudi bil iz tujine. Mislim, jaz nisem govoril švedsko, ko sem bil 5 let star, ne. Tako da ko sem jaz prišel v šolo, je začel tudi iz nič, ampak sem se zelo hitro mogel prilagoditi, sem se navadil švedščino perfektno govoriti. Danes še tudi Švedi ne govorijo v enim delov v Malmöju pa drugih mestih dobro švedščino, zato ker nemajo zato Švedov okoli sebe, ne. Tako da tukaj, recimo, jaz bom vam povedal, jaz tudi študiram zdaj latinščino, kot sem omenil, ne, na univerzi, tako malo na strani, ne, to nima z biznisa za delati. In tisti učenci, ki not pridejo, ki so direktno iz šole, oni sploh ne znajo gramatiko, slovnico več. Oni ne znajo enostaven stavek, ne bojo ga znali razdeliti, kaj je verb, substantiv, akusativ in te bi rekel, ki ga note. In to se opazi na švedskem, da ne znajo več pisati, pravilno, kar prijo na work interview, če hoče delo, ti zmeraj moraš jih vprašati, ne piši tukaj tvoj CV. In bojo zelo, večina mladih se bojo bali, ker ne znajo napisati en majhen osnutek teksta v sebi, ne, ampak grejo domov in potem kakšen pomaga in potem pridejo nazaj, tako oni so delali, ne. Tako da tukaj so veliki, jaz sem isto predavanje sem tudi imel na Rotary klub Lund pred enim mesecem nazaj in smo tudi prišli v to diskusijo noter, kako to in kaj se lahko naredi. Ne vem, tisti, ki prijo iz slovenskih šol, imajo zelo dobro bazo, so zelo dobro zaučeni in jaz mislim, slovenska šola danes je tako, kot je bila ta šola na Švedskem, ko sem jaz hodil tukaj. Kadar jaz slišim, da se v Sloveniji poskuša gledati, kaj Švedska, Skandinavija, da si bi to kopirali, se jaz malo ustrašim, ne. Jaz bi rekel, če hočemo imeti dobro izobrazbo v Sloveniji, zadržimo to, kar je, to je star koncept, gre nazaj dosti let v času, ko ste imeli to pedagogijo. To, kar se dela tukaj, ni dobro. Mi, kar smo naredili, da mi smo vzeli naše otroke ven iz švedske šole in smo dali in the IB school, če poznate to. In naša hčerka je bila tam od 1. razreda, sin pa od 5. razreda naprej, ne. Tam je pa en kurikulum, ki je kontroliran izven Švedske, tako da je zelo regulirano, matura je in vse tako, jaz bi res rekel, da se mora to pregledati. Problem je tudi to, kar vem, ko sem dosti v Ameriki to diskutiral, da če se vzame enega profesorja pedagoške fakultete na Švedskem in če se pogleda, koliko teh profesorjev je imel matematiko v gimnaziji, kamor so imeli, rečemo, derivat, integrale, malo avancirane, je to skoraj noben. Zato, ker v Ameriki, če ti hočeš iti naprej, moraš iti iz gimnazije v college je šlo dobro šolo, to bo izbral sam najboljše. In tako na tak način se lahko vidi, da vsi morajo imeti, bi rekel, bolj, ne samo, če si v lingvistiko zainteresiran, da ne boš sam lingvistiko že na srednji šoli, ampak se boš tudi eksponiral za druge. Tako kot tisti, ki je v znanosti, mora tudi zgodovino, jezike, to možgane trenira, ne, na logiko in tako. In to se zelo specializira gor na Švedskem, in tudi to jaz mislim je potem problem, ker kadar pride en tak človek v pedagoško fakulteto kot znanstvenik in profesor, bo bolj kritičen proti tem učenju, ki je basiran na znanost in performance. To je moj, in tako sem zelo angažiran, tudi vidim zdaj, ko študiram latinščino, tako da je to čisto drug svet, kot sem imel na fakulteti za znanosti pri Lund University. In drugačen način mišljenja in je zelo zanimivo študirati.
Dario, Marjan Cer sem jaz in 8 let latinščine sem imel, pa 5 let stare grščine in odločitev vaša, oziroma tvoja, je bila perfektna, ker to boš imel še dolg časa, dosti dela, ko bo začel prevajati Cicerona pa Horaca, te to čaka.
Tole sem imel danes v latinščini, Cicero, knjiga Tuskulanov.
Bravo. Zdaj, če ti bo dolg čas, pa še kolega, jaz sem tudi kemik, in staro grščino moraš tu še.
Ja, to me tudi zanima.
Čakaj, ker je v MIT-ju znano, da za odpočitek zvečer, pa za dobro spanje, študentje študirajo, pa prevajajo latinščino, pa staro grščino.
Ne, to me zelo zanima, zato me zanimajo zelo dosti stari dokumenti, ki so napisani v Jordanes, Julijanus, ko omenjajo naše kraje. In imam odlog, ki piše v latinščino, pa v grščini, na drugi strani pa v angleščini, ampak sem videl, da angleščina, ki ste latinščino preveli, je dosti rečeno.
Ne more.
More sam
Zdaj pa, jaz sem bil na Švedskem eno leto, v Landskroni.
To blizu.
Ja, Skone. In potem sem bil tudi eno leto v Nemčiji, pa pol leta v Veliki Britaniji. Tako da položaj je tak, ti si malo prehud do Nemcev, pa do ostalih Evropejcev, ker recimo z Nemci si gospod, če znaš nemščino. To so strašno počaščeni, kakor tudi Italijani, italijansko tudi znam ven iz latinščine, je ravno tako si kralj, da tako rečem. Zdaj pa tole. Jaz sem, da bi dvignil ta nivo naših faksov, sem predaval predmet iz ideje preko laboratorija, pilotnega industrijskega obrata in končnega projekta določene tovarne. Torej, veš, koliko so me plačali za garajne, jaz sem res garal, ne? 40 študentov sem imel, plačali so me tam $200 na semester. Ja, to rijema plivi, rekel Francozi. Zdaj pa tole. Koliko si ti dobil na štartu državnega denarja? Kako ti je pomagala kraljevina, no? Da si lahko preko teh začetnih materialnih težav splezal.
Ja, prvičkrat, ko smo začeli s prvim podjetjem, ki je bilo še čist pred leta 2000, se mi zdi, sem dobil 30,000 evrov države in 30,000 evrov od ene, bi rekel,
agencije.
Enega sklada.
Agencija.
60,000 evrov smo začeli.
Kako bi je bilo pa urejeno vračanje?
Ja, če je uspeh, se mora vračati. Pravzaprav od države ni bilo nobenega vračanja.
Nič, nobenih obligacij.
Ne, ni bilo. To je bil, pot smo pa s tistim denarjem, ki smo ga imeli noter, smo pa pot iskali enega venture capital company, ki smo jo dobili 97. leta za enem drugim podjetjem. To ni bil tak, ki smo ga pot sami naprej dali. Oni so hoteli imeti vse, mi smo pa rekli, ne, to hočete, ostalo ćemo mi zadržati v svojem podjetju. In pot smo eno podjetje odprli, s tistim zagonskim
kapitalom.
Ja.
Venture capital.
Venture capital, no. In pot, to je bilo prvič, ko sem imel malo, bi rekel, negativne izkušnje z venture capital, kaj oni hočejo, Tako je bilo, oni so rekli, oni hočejo...
To je ta agencija teh javila.
To je privatno podjetje, ki je venture capital.
Tako.
To je čist, drugače ni venture capital, če ni to neki, bi rekel...
Privatnega,
ja. In oni, kaj hočejo, je, da nevesto lepo oblečejo in prodajo, oženijo. To so govorili, to je bil... In podkaj to razumel, oni bojo tukaj noter, oni bojo vse gor oblekli in po tebe in vse skupaj prodajo, in oni zaslužijo denar in grejo, tako da...
A so oni tvoje podjetje vodili? Ali bil menedžer?
Mi smo odcepili polovica podjetja, ki smo z njim skupaj, drugo polovico smo pa zadržali. Potem pa jaz malo preštudiral, kako oni so prišli do kapitala in so zvedeli, oni so šli preko borze. Tako da 2 let kasneje sem pa šel sam noter preko borze in sem moje drugo podjetje kapital pobral, pa nisem imel nobenega več, jaz sem potem imel kontrolo. In s tem je se spremenilo vse, ker smo s tistim kapitalom smo lahko gradili in smo imeli v Lifeassu smo imeli 5000 delničarjev takrat, ko smo pustili, pa so drugi naš delež kupili. Tako da Ampak to tako ne deluje v Nemčiji ali v Danski. Oni nimajo teh borznih za taka mala podjetja. To morajo biti večja podjetja, ki grejo na borze.
Ja, kako potem denar zbirajo? Kako denar zbirajo Nemci, recimo, ali pa Danci?
Danci pa Nemci imajo več, bi rekel, podjetja grejo več noter in financirajo, kar je tudi v redu, mogoče tudi bolj, če si manjši, če so pogoji v redu, tako da to se mora malo pregledati, kakšen projekt se ima in...
Zdaj je velika afera proizvodnja seveda injekcij, ne?
Ja.
Injekcije. AstraZeneca.
Ja.
Astra je švedsko podjetje.
Ja, AstraZeneca je en podjetje, ki je v Angliji imajo, svoj headquarters.
Headquarters.
Ampak
ovo, da malo latinščino ponovimo. Ovo je Astra, je švedsko. So švedski lastniki.
Ja, oni so bili iz Štokholma, to štimajo.
Kaj pa kraljeva družina, a ima svoj kapital?
Ja, oni imajo tudi svoj kapital, ja. Ampak tudi dobijo od davkoplačevalcev apanažo za vzdržavanje gradov.
Gradov, ja. In trenutno je tvoje stanje kakšno? A imaš ti tujce v upravi?
V podjetju?
Ja.
Ja, enega iz Švice imamo, ki je tudi Švede,
Ja.
Tako da imamo, smo imeli resnično. Tudi Edi je bil enkrat v upravi eno od naših podjetij, Lahko ti poveš malo.
Samo še to zadnje vprašanje, the last question, najprej seveda fantastično, po švedsko, solidno in odlično si predaval. In zdaj me pa zanima seveda AstraZeneca, še enkrat, oprost. Ali mora zdaj, če bi ti bil AstraZeneca, a bi moral ti državi pa vladi vračati denar, če bi tako fantastično ti šlo, kot gre zdaj Astri?
Ne, ampak ne boš nikdar več denarja vračal, kot si ga dobil. Oni ne dobijo royalty nek tazga,
Ja, royalty, tekoče licenco.
Ne, royalty sam gre, dokler si odplačal to, kar si dobil, če si se sposodil.
A potem je pa kat?
Ja, tako da to je hiter, če gre. Oni niso tam zato, da bojo služili denar, ampak da bojo podjetja zadanjali. Tako da...
Odlično, hvala lepa, super.
Ciril, imaš eno vprašanje? Je še kdo drug?
Ne, samo komentar Dariju in Marjanu. Marjana Mazzucato je profesorica na Londonski ekonomski fakulteti in velika zagovornica javnih investicij v znanost in razvoj. In ona bi pač vama obema rekla pač uspešno podjetje, ki ga država financira, ne samo v obliki neposrednih financiranja projekta, ampak tudi zato, ker šole, ceste in tako naprej, in gasilce plačuje in kaj še,
Z davki.
Tako, davki, točno to. Res je. Hvala, jaz se bom moral posloviti, je bilo pa tole čudovito, tako da res, hvala. Bra.
Še kdo vprašanje? Če ne, bi jaz mogoče izkoristil to priliko. Jaz sem nekoč skrbel za sklad državnih podjetij, bil kot upravljalec. In smo si zelo prizadevali, da bi dobili taki ljudi, kot si ti, Dario, iz sveta, ki so tam dosegli nekaj, ki so videli veliki beli svet in ki so po duši Slovenci še vedno, da bi vstopili v nadzorne svete slovenskih podjetij. Bi bila to neka taka perspektiva, recimo, zate?
Ja, če se najde časa, tako bi rekel, tudi vprašanje, katero podjetje.
Bravo.
Ker v nadzornem svetu ima veliko odgovornost, in včasih, ko sem tako bil, sem hitro skočil, pa zdaj zmeraj hočem malo pregledati, malo due diligence, preden se
Ja.
Rada lahko zelo drago, če se gre v podjetje, kamor so. Mislim, da Slovenc absolutno bi pomagal, če bi bilo v mojem moči.
Če bi bila kakšna Krka, recimo.
Ja, Krka je lepo, to je dobro podjetje. To sem slišal enkrat gospoda, ki je imel predavanje, predsednika, a sem pozabil zdaj.
Colarič.
Ja, Čolanič. To je taka tema zdaj v Skandinaviji. Ne, in resno, ker sem slišal, ker je on povedal, kako je, ko gre v Davos, kako ga malo, bi rekel, podcenjujejo, da so the sharks, pa tako naprej. Sem rekel, ne to, ampak je pravilno, tako moramo v Sloveniji delati, ne da se delamo, da gremo na ta, bi rekel, idejo, da bomo bili, mi moramo naše pogoje uporabljati maksimalno. In mislim, da Krka to je eno od najboljših podjetij, ki imamo v Sloveniji, ni to ena tretjina R&D budžeta, še več slovenskega totalnega so. Ja, to.
Ja, izvoza.
Izvoza, ja, točno to.
Dobro. Mislim, da smo imeli en čudovit večer, čudovito predavanje. Mislim, dal nam je zamisliti marsikaj, marsikakšna zanimiva iztočnica. Jaz se našemu predavatelju najlepše zahvalil. Zahvalil se vsem vam, kolegom, ki ste z mano preživeli še en lep večer. Upam, da ne vem, kako se Edi dogovoril, lahko to predavanje tudi delimo z našimi kolegi Rotarijci, ali ne, to so ta pol sama dva zmenila. Tako vsem še enkrat, hvala še enkrat in lep večer vsem želim. Lahko noč.
Lahko noč, hvala.
Lahko noč.
Lahko noč.
Ko noč. Adijo.